The computer says 7 o'clock, so I think we'll get going. All the panelists are here tonight, here at the moment. So welcome to everybody. And my job is really just to explain how this is going to work and make sure that everybody can hear and see properly. And to that end, I'm just one more time going to run through everybody. David, would you like to just say hello?
Hello, I'm David Busch.
That's great, thank you. And Elizabeth May.
Hello, everyone, nice to see you.
Great, and Sherri Moore-Arbour of the Liberal Party.
Good evening.
Great, welcome. And Sabina Singh.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Great, and Tarah Stafford, who is our moderator this evening. Just say hello. Can we hear? Oh,
I was muted.
There you go. Okay,
Of
and
all the
Tara's audible too. Okay, so as viewers, all of you will be able to watch and listen to everything that goes on this evening, and also to use the chat feature, which is a button at the bottom of the screen there. And through that, you can ask questions in real time. Time is tight, and we will get to as many questions as we possibly can. And we have had some sent in advance, so please bear with us. We'll do it the best we can. There are a lot of questions, and I'm sure everybody has a lot of questions for you. In a moment, Tarah will get things rolling, and each candidate will be invited to give a 2-minute opening statement. From there, we should go straight to questions from the public. Each question posed by the public will have a 1-minute response from either the individual candidate to whom it is addressed, or 1 minute for each candidate if it is addressed to all of you. At about 8:10, the last question of the evening will be asked by Tarah. And after your responses, we'll go straight to a 1-minute closing statement by each candidate. And then it'll be time to wrap up. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. A big thank you to you, the candidates. I know how busy you are. And our thanks go to Country Grocer and to the Salt Spring Exchange for their help putting together tonight's event. Just in case anyone doesn't know and isn't aware, that the election day is a week on Monday, the 20th. And the advanced voting days here in Salt Spring are this coming Friday through Monday. That's the 10th through the 13th. And that's at the high school. Certainly is for me anyway. I'm not sure about anyone else. And you can still vote by mail. And you go to elections.ca to find out more details about that. Okay, let's go. Tarah, over to you and have a good evening. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Richard, and good evening, everyone. Now, before we get started, I'd first like to say how grateful I am to have the opportunity to work and live on this island. And I want to acknowledge that this is the unceded territory and home of the Coast Salish people and has been since time immemorial. So I'd like to begin by introducing our 4 candidates. We have Elizabeth May from the Green Party, and we have David Busch from the Conservative Party, Sherri Moore-Arbour from the Liberal Party, and Sabina Singh from the NDP. Thank you all for making the time for us tonight. Format we're going to follow tonight is very straightforward. As Richard was saying, you'll have 1 minute per answer. And just so you know, I have a little bell at the end of your 1 minute. I have a lovely assistant here who is Macy, a future voter, and she will ring the bell. I'll give you enough time to finish what your thought is, and then we'll move on to the next candidate. That is for the questions that have a number of different people being asked the question. And we'll just do the same thing if it's just one person being asked the question. So we're first going to start off, though, with a 2-minute opening statement from each of the candidates. And we're going to do this fairly. So we're going to do it alphabetically by surname. We will begin with David Busch from the Conservatives. David, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much for the invite, and thank you to everyone who's watching. For those of you I haven't had the chance to meet in person yet, I have a degree in biochemistry, but I realized I like people more than test tubes. Went out, got a second degree in nursing, worked a number of years as a critical care nurse, and I taught nursing for 2 different universities. I then went on to get a law degree, and I've been working as a lawyer for the last 15 years. I like helping people, as a nurse and as a lawyer, solving problems. And that's part of the reason why I put my name forwards to be the next MP for Saanich Gulf Islands. The other reason are my 2 wonderful boys. They're 4 and 5 years old. Now, when I stood before you 2 years ago, I was deeply concerned with the direction that Trudeau was taking this country. Now, I'm terrified. One of the things I love about being a candidate is you get to travel this great riding. You get to talk to the people, find out what their problems are, things that you could help them with as an MP. And I'm always impressed with the resiliency of the islanders. One of the big problems I hear on Salt Spring over and over again is housing. There's no housing for their kids to move into. They can't even keep staff at their hospital. Well, the Dragonfly Commons is helping with that. And it's a little piece, but it's a step in the right direction, and it shows the resiliency of the islanders. Likewise, the Gulf Island Tourist Partnership is coming up with great creative ways to help with transporting people across the islands and with helping their local economy. But for me, the big one is the Lady Minto Hospital ER expansion. It is completely being funded at the lower levels. The provincial and the federal government have not yet contributed to this. And that's something I would like to help out with as your MP. Thanks for watching tonight, and I look forward to your questions.
Tara, were you telling me I should go ahead? You're muted.
I did it again, sorry. Yeah. Okay, that will be the last time. Yes, Elizabeth, now it is your turn. Thank you very much, David and Elizabeth May.
Thank you so much. And I want to start also by acknowledging the territory that I'm on. I'm on the peninsula, and I raise my hands to the peoples who have been the stewards and owners and of this incredible place. The Washanak people, I raise my hands, Haishka, Ishka Sam, all honor and respect to everyone here tonight. And thank you to the incredible generosity and patience of Indigenous peoples. The greatest honor of my life has been to serve this community and the many communities within it for the last 10 years as your member of parliament. My favorite picture from election night 10 years ago was a great shot of everybody gathered at Moby's and saying, whoa, it was a wonderful picture because it wasn't expected at all that a Green Party candidate would be able to defeat a sitting member of Stephen Harper's cabinet. That all feels a very long time ago, but the work has been so rewarding. I have to tell you, working with these communities, with Salt Spring Island, with the communities on the peninsula, all the wonderful organizations, community groups that are here that show such an incredible commitment to place. Groups that protect the Salish Sea, groups that are committed to restoring habitat for our salmon, groups that are replanting eelgrass, the things like the Salt Spring Foundation, Lady Minto Hospital, all of the work that goes on that's grassroots and really grounded in loving this place and taking care of it. That's the work I believe in. I believe that being a member of parliament is about being of service, public service to the community and the people who elect me. That's why I love the Green Party, because we are not beholden to any backroom party people. When I'm elected, when I was first elected in 2011, she goes, how do you divide your time? My only priority is to be the best member of parliament Saanich Gulf Islands has ever had. I am committed to continuing to try to meet that goal. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. And now we will go to Sherri Moore-Arbour from the Liberal Party.
Thank you very much, Tara. My name is Sherri Moore-Arbour, and I am the new candidate in this race. My family and I are the proud full-time residents of Galiano Island. We chose Galiano because of its rugged beauty, natural environment, and close-knit community, and I suspect that the same is true for many Salt Spring Island residents. What drew us to Galliano also calls on us to respect and protect it. As a Gulf Island resident, I'm frequently in awe of our environment, including the beauty of our greatest natural asset, the Salish Sea that surrounds us. If there's been a theme in my career and life, it has been working and sometimes fighting for, when necessary, equity and inclusion. I co-founded and run a national public affairs firm that is focused in the areas of public education, public health, and inclusion. And we work closely with clients that are working very hard to build healthier, more inclusive communities. I'm a former locally elected school board trustee and vice chair of a school board. And while some of you may think that local politics are a long way from the House of Commons, I can tell you that this taught me about accountability to voters and the importance of balancing outcomes in the context of resource scarcity. I've belonged to the Lions Club movement since 2008, following my late father's footsteps. Our family has had a long history of community involvement and has resided in the Peninsula region since the 80s. I'm the mother of 2 teen sons and have been married to my husband Al for 25 years, who is a vice principal. And our children and I are Indigenous. When I was asked to step up as a Liberal candidate for the election, I first spoke to family and friends and really strongly reflected on what's at stake now for Canada and for this beautiful part of the world. I am running to bring a strong voice within a compassionate and pragmatic government.
Great, thank you so much, Sherri. And now finally, we have Sabrina Singh from the NDP.
Sabina. Thank you for hosting this amazing event, and for all of you for watching, and all the candidates for coming. My name is Sabina Singh. I'm running to be the MP for Sandwich Gulf Islands in the 44th Canadian election. I am a mother, an academic, a dance artist, a dog owner, and a wife. I have taught political science in British Columbia for 15 years. Through hard work and perseverance, I earned a PhD in Global Studies and International Relations from the University of Victoria. I have 2 beautiful children. And in 2019, my youngest graduated high school. I married the venerable Alistair McCollum, and he has given me the strength and support to run for politics. I, like NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, was born into the Sikhi culture, which values service and service to one's community. For a couple of years, I taught my workshop Exploring Diversity and Power Through Movement to dance students in high schools throughout the region. In the last couple of years, I have worked with the Center for World Indigenous Studies, working with Indigenous nations across the globe. The NDP has an amazing platform and has been fighting for people through these difficult past 2 years. I want to join them in fighting for you and the environment around us. I want to join them to help them create an equitable world, one that we want to live in and that we're proud to hand to our grandchildren. Please vote NDP in this election and vote for me, Sabina Singh.
Great, thank you so much, Sabina. And sorry I pronounced your name Sabrina before. I know it's Sabina.
Very common error.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to get started with some questions now. We've had a lot of questions sent in to us, so we're going to start with those, and we're going to do the first questions that we do are all going to be questions that are for all of the candidates, and I'm going to switch up the order every time of who answers first. So we are going to start, and you have 1 minute for your answer for each one of these. And again, I hope you're able to hear the bell okay. So we'll start with the question that Anne wants to know the answer to, which is, what steps will you take, if any, to promote and enable the capture of solar energy on a wide-scale basis, including incentives for homeowners and energy companies such as BC Hydro to get on board? And we're going to start with Elizabeth May.
Thanks for a great question, Anne. We are committed as a party across the country, and I've been working on this for, some of you will know, for decades, to 100% decarbonize our electricity grid. Solar energy, wind energy, geothermal, tidal in the future. We have a lot of viable, affordable options. And solar is now cheaper than coal, which is something I didn't think I'd see in my lifetime. So we have been pressing and we have made some headway with the government in having solar installation be part of deep energy retrofits. You know, I think of it as democratizing energy, taking it away from BC Hydro and large monopolistic centralized systems to ensure that we have more renewable energy everywhere. And as you say, well, the success of the Gulf Island Secondary School in putting solar panels on the roof demonstrated what we can do when we harness solar energy. The federal government hasn't done nearly enough. Job one is to take off the tariffs on importing solar panels from overseas, make them more affordable for Canadians.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. And now we are going to hear from Sherri.
Thank you very much. I first will say that, you know, I think it's very interesting that roughly 60% of clean energy, solar clean energy projects in British Columbia are whole or partly owned by Indigenous communities in BC who struggle who struggle in their relationship with BC Hydro in terms of getting their energy to market. And that continues to be an important barrier to both in terms of economic reconciliation and also the transition to clean green energy. I will say too that we are, you know, obviously solar is a key part of our transition to clean energy, and we are absolutely committed to it. In terms of the policies, developing an additional investment tax credit for a range of renewable energy and battery storage solutions to accelerate the deployment of clean energy. I think with that, I've probably exceeded my minute.
Thank you, Sherri. And Sabina, you're up next.
We're absolutely committed to retrofitting existing housing and creating new affordable green housing. We would like to see that be affordable for everyone, and we will work together across party lines to make sure this happens and to ensure that we can access affordable solar energy and all kinds of green energy for all Canadians to be able to access and use. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabina. And now we are over to David.
Thank you, Anne. I point you towards our environmental plan. One of the differences between us and the Liberals is the money that's collected off of the fossil fuels tax will go straight back to you as the consumer. You can use this, for example, for things such as an electric bike or solar energy. Anything that will help you reduce your own personal carbon footprint. We want to try to encourage people to make the right choice and make it easier for them. So by turning around and allowing you to retrofit your house, for example, with solar panels, that will not only decrease your carbon output, it'll also make life more affordable for you. And that's part of the reason why I believe we have the best plan.
Great, thank you, David. And we are on to our next question. So this question comes from David. What would your party government do to make housing more affordable to the majority of Canadians? And what would your party or government do to reverse the growing income inequality among Canadians? We're going to start here with Sherri.
This, I will say, is probably the most consistent piece of feedback that I'm hearing on the doorstep when talking to voters around the riding, whether they're in the Gulf Islands or in the peninsula. The pressure manifests as either a lack of rental stock, the increasing price in rental, or you know, the inaccessibility of sort of getting into the housing market. It is particularly acute on the Gulf Islands, specifically and very little is available for those who are seeking housing. A Liberal government is dedicated to making rent more affordable, or the path to home ownership through rental, through a rent to own program, which I think is one of the major barriers people who are renting face when they pay oftentimes the equivalent of a mortgage in rent and are unable to concurrently save for a down payment. So that's one of the things that we're doing.
Thank you, Sherri. And Sabina, we're over to you now.
This is a question that comes from the heart of our plan. Affordable housing and environmentalism, affordability and social justice and climate justice are related, we believe. So for instance, when you are able to afford living close to where you work, we can make affordable and clean green choices and have increased transit and increased communities where we can live and work. So we are committed to building new affordable housing right away and making, giving plans for renters. We have subsidies for renters, and I believe we're one of the only parties that have that. We are consistent with wanting a new fair tax system. The gap between the rich and the poor has been growing exponentially in the last few years. And we need to start having a fair tax system that can be used for affordable housing and to work for Canadians instead of billionaires and big corporations.
Great. Thank you, Sabina. And David, that's over to you now.
Thank you. This is a problem across the country and especially here in Saanich Gulf Islands. Our plan, first of all, we're looking at bringing in 1 million new homes over the next 3 years. Secondly, it's a matter, we have to get that supply up to where supply exceeds the demand. We want to turn around and encourage investment for rental specific development to help get the rental costs down as well, because that's also a major problem. We're going to be looking at doing that through tax investments to bring in both domestic and foreign investment. Because there's a problem with foreign investors buying single family homes on speculation, we're going to put a 2-year moratorium on that and then reassess. If you want to move here, live in the house and pay Canadian taxes, we're okay with that, but not if you're going to stay there. For the complete plan, again, I'd refer you to our website and please take a look. Oh, I think you're muted again.
No,
Oh, you're good.
No, I'm not. Okay, hi. And it's your turn, Elizabeth.
Thank you. This is a critical issue across the country and a growing concern of access to affordable housing. We know it's a crisis. And I'd like to reference that specifically on Salt Spring Island, people have a sense that Salt Spring Island is more affluent. But if you do it as a ratio of the population, the problem of acute homelessness may be more severe on Salt Spring Island than anywhere else in Canada. So we work hard to deal with the issue of acute homelessness. At the same time, we have to have affordability in those places for rent or to purchase across the country. But specifically here, our platform calls for ending the use of basically money laundering from foreign interests to buy large condos for millions of dollars and then not live in them. The impact of Airbnbs needs to be mentioned. They need to be regulated and we need to obtain tax from them because they're taking housing off the market. And you asked also in this question about the income gap. We need to bring in a guaranteed livable income to end poverty for good.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And we're on to another question. This question comes to us from Eric. Do the rights of the individual supersede the needs of the community? And we're going to start with Sabina, sorry.
Sorry, you're going to have to repeat that question for me. I'm sorry. Do the rights of the community,
the rights of the individual supersede the needs of the community?
No, it's a very Star Trek question. I very much appreciate that. No, the needs of the community outweigh the needs of the one. Spock told us many years ago.
Okay, and David?
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. Canada was founded on the collective good. The needs of the group are incredibly important, but at the same time, over the course of history, we've also seen minority rights get trampled. The rights of the individual are also important and must be protected, and it's a balancing act. I do not believe either side can be given full reign, because you must protect the individuals, you must protect the community.
Thank you. And Elizabeth?
Thanks, Tara. No, responsibilities and rights go together. And I think in our consumeristic, and I have to say somewhat selfish society, we've somehow decided that individual rights trample the responsibilities that we have, the duties we have to our neighbors. We have a very strong commitment in Canada, and I think it differentiates us from the United States. You can go back to reading Alex de Tocqueville and the way he differentiated what the United States seemed to be built on in terms of grabbing individual rights and pursuing them. I think there's a big difference, and it's reflected in the fact that the US is life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and we are peace, order, and good government. We haven't had a lot of that lately, but I have to say that we need, as Canadians, to identify, as my dear friend Dorothy Cutting informed me, I must continue to pursue, that we describe Canada as a compassionate society, a caring society, a loving place where we prize our community commitments above individual greed.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And Sherri?
Thank you for the question, and obviously front of mind in the resolution, the steps that are necessary in the resolution of the pandemic. It's definitely something we're watching play out in very alarming protests around the country. My position is that, you know, the vaccination program, if that's the example that is driving this question, is really about protecting community and also protecting the individual in the meantime. But, you know, for those who have not yet been vaccinated and are hesitating, you know, I think that the community wellness clearly is at stake, and experts tell us that the path to ending this pandemic certainly is through vaccinations. And I think fundamentally it's about the social contract, protecting one another and our ability to return to a normal, stable life.
Thank you very much. The next question we have has come to us from Kurt, and it is: the climate emergency is causing severe drought. We have a water supply crisis on Salt Spring Island, and it's only getting worse. As our MP, what leadership will you provide over the next 6 months to get us out of this life emergency crisis before the 2022 drought arrives? And we're going to start with David.
Thanks for that question. The St. Mary's Lake Reservoir is at critically low levels. Salt Springs on a level 4 alert, and people are responding and limiting their water use, and that is great, but that's a temporary measure. We need to have a long-term solution, and that involves sitting down with the people of Salt Spring, with the other islands, because I believe Pender's trucking water in, and looking at all the options. Are we going to look at trucking water in long-term? Are we going to look at perpetual rationing of water, desalination plant, perhaps a pipeline? But we need to look at all the options for their efficiency, their environmental responsibility, and long-term sustainability to come to a solution that's going to work going forwards for all of Salt Spring. And I would look forward to working with Salt Spring to come up with the proper solution.
Beth, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I mean, the larger point, of course, is that if we're going to deal with drought, fires, and what we're facing, we need to address the climate emergency as the emergency it is, and transition as quickly as possible off fossil fuels, including canceling the Trans Mountain Pipeline. But with only a minute to respond to the specifics of the drought question on Salt Spring Island, as a federal MP, I've been working on the issues for quite some time. When you dive into governance structures around the Gulf Islands, you find that the systems are different one island to the other. Part of the problem in getting new water infrastructure systems that help us collect water and ensure that we're prepared for drought on Salt Spring are bedeviled by the fact that the provincial government will not provide funds to Salt Spring because it's a water improvement area. And they're using that as leverage, I think, to try to force Salt Spring into the CRD, which I think, resist, because we want to be able to have our infrastructure developed so that we protect ourselves from drought without feeling coerced into changing our governance system. So I believe I can continue to work and change that.
Great, thank you. And Sherri?
Thank you. I mean, it's clear that this is an issue. If you live on the Gulf Islands, no matter the island, this is an issue that is deeply alarming and affects us all. On Galiano, certainly water shortages where I live are an issue as well. And, you know, we have the concerns around the immediacy of the crisis of literally running out of water, and then, you know, its connection to, as Ms. May says, the long-term impacts of climate change and the systemic issue, which calls for an organized response from the federal government and a dedicated action plan to mitigate climate change. And I think that we have that plan. So, I mean, in terms of what I would do, certainly I am personally involved, but I also am aligned in terms of the priorities around climate change mitigation, and find it's an inescapable priority. Without water, we have no life. And certainly the beauty around us is at risk.
Thank you. Sabina?
I think that it's very important to know that, of course, we have to take climate action seriously, and we have to take it immediately. Over the last few years, we're the only G7 country that the emissions have been rising. But the water issue on Salt Spring and on all the Gulf Islands is a desperate issue, and one that needs to be dealt with and is related to the need for climate action. But it is also noted that it shows the need for action from the federal government to support all these levels of government in order to promote clean water, not only on Indigenous reserves across the country, but also on the Gulf Islands. We need to make sure the federal government is supporting all levels of government in order to be doing that.
Thank you. Okay, our next question comes to us from Sandra and Lauren. Please speak specifically to your plans for electoral reform and the abandonment of the first past post elections. And we're going to begin with Elizabeth.
Sorry, of course, this has been a passion of my life. I've written books about it. I was, for my sins, I ended up being on the special committee on electoral reform, as Justin Trudeau famously promised over 1,000 times in 2015. 2015 would be the last election held under first past the post. I was on the parliamentary committee to deliver that result, and then the rug was pulled out from under us. By the way, this 2021 marks the 100th year since the first parliamentary committee studied electoral systems and said first past the post is not appropriate for Canada. Our platform released today revives the commitment to get to electoral reform by working to a citizens' assembly at the national level.
Okay, thank you very much. And we're going to go to Sherri after that.
Thank you for the question. This is a tricky one as the Liberal candidate on the Zoom call. What I will say is, you know, we've taken this, British Columbians have taken this to the people at the provincial level in recent years in the form of a referendum, which was unsuccessful, as everyone on the call will note. It, you know, establishing our democratic process is obviously an enormous undertaking. And I think that, you know, as somebody who is very passionate over the course of my career about representational politics. It's something that, certainly fairness weighs heavily on my mind, but this is something that, as I said, we've taken to the people in BC, and BC residents who voted in the referendum voted not in support of changing the current system.
Thank you. Sabina.
Thank you. This is an absolutely clear issue for us. I'm also a political scientist and have been working on electoral reform for a long time, and that we need electoral reform is very clear to me. The question in Canada has often been between order versus democracy, and we need to side on the side of democracy. And we also have to really know that we have amazing people across this country with amazing expertise, and we can do this, and we can do it quickly, and we can do it well. So the NDP is committed. If we form government, we will do this right away. We will have electoral reform, and we will have a referendum after 2 terms of 2 uses of this as an electoral reform. Then we will have a referendum to say, do you like it or not, after it's been used. So we will do it and show to Canadians, or allow them to choose then, once they know what it feels like to have a non-first past the post system.
Thank you, Sabina. And David?
I find it interesting. We've heard those very same words back in 2015 from Justin Trudeau, that this would be the last election under first past the post. He came in with majority government. Nothing was done on that. Ironically, one would assume as a conservative, I would be very much in favor of, because we had the most votes in the last federal election, and we would have formed the government. I believe our parliamentary system works, and especially in a minority government situation, it's the people in Ottawa that make the difference, not the type and the standard of how people are voted in. That said, I do agree that a citizens' assembly, if we were to proceed with this, would be the way to go. However, even here in BC, we've gone through it twice within the last decade, and both times it's rejected. I think at this point in time, there's more serious issues facing Canada that demand our attention, but this is something that can be talked about as after the housing crisis, after the environmental issues are looked after COVID has been looked after.
Thank you, David. So now the next question comes to us from Kathy. It's a little bit longer question. How will you and your party address the reluctance of a considerable proportion of the population who now recognize the reality of climate change and are frightened by it, yet still may be reluctant to drastically change their lifestyle in order to reduce emissions? Do you yourself agree that tackling climate change will require us to make dramatic changes to our way of living, such as leaving fossil fuels in the ground, eating and farming sustainability, and traveling and consuming less? And we're going to begin this question with Sherri.
Thank you for the question. I mean, this is the tricky part, that, changes require changes from everyone. Individual choices that include massive shifts, investments, personal costs, shifts in behavior, and the changes are complex. And I think that the consequences are around us, and undeniably so. So, and I certainly have the impression that people who were once on the fence are now certainly compelled by events like the heat dome and the fires that are increasing in severity in British Columbia. So, I think that the answer is similarly complex, but also urgent. Ensuring that we provide supports to people to transition, for example, off of fossil fuels for things like their home electrification, increasing the capacity in British Columbia across the country to be able to make the transition. So that's a huge investment. And then ultimately electric vehicles, public transportation, that sort of thing. All of it is involving enormous infrastructure investments and time.
Great. Thank you very much. Sabina.
Thank you. I'd like you for the question, and I definitely like to know how in this giant change that we need to have, buying a pipeline makes any sense in doing that. But I think that we need a massive commitment to lower the temperatures in the that Canada is emitting. And I believe that we need to work together as a society in order to make these massive changes in having good, affordable local food, in having public transit, in having electrified vehicles, all the things that mean that when we have pharmacare, we have dental care, we have proper wages, we have the money to make the choices we need for environmental change. And we can only do that if we're not worried about feeding our children or paying our rent.
Thank you. And now we'll go over to David.
So big question for 1 minute. I'd refer you again, please go look at our platform online for the full answer. But I'd start off again with our plan. That money that's collected with the price on carbon is going to go back to you to help you turn around and make better decisions to help with the environment. There's 100,000 people in this riding. There's 38 million Canadians. If we each take one small step, that comes out to one big collective step. But it's important that we don't leave people behind. And that's why our plan also tries to address the problem of the rising costs of living. Because if we can't, as Ms. Singh said, have a roof over our head or put food on the table, the rest really isn't going to matter. So we have to work together on that. Again, it's a big question. I'm sorry I don't have time to get to all of it.
Thank you, David. Elizabeth.
Well, thank you, Kathy, for the question. And obviously, yes, we need to act on the warnings of science, which frankly, none of the other parties understand are about a carbon budget, which is rapidly being exhausted. We do not have 3 or 4 another election cycle to solve this. And it's not that complicated. Ban fracking, cancel the TMX pipeline, stop subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, electrify and connect our electrical grid across the country with renewable energy. All of the details are in our plan, but the reality is none of the other parties understand we're in an emergency. You can tell by the targets they've chosen for reductions. None of the reductions, obviously not the Conservatives, the NDP, or the Liberals, will avoid losing human civilization within this century. And I'm not prepared to accept incremental fakery anymore.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Okay, our next question is, I am interested in understanding, I'm sorry I don't have the person's name for this, but I'm interested in understanding how each of the candidates see themselves and their party managing the pandemic going forward. What will you do to protect our rights? How do you see Canada's deepened debt load being effectively managed? And we're going to begin with Sabina.
Thank you. I'm really proud of how my party has behaved in the last 2 years and how we have been able to really fight for Canadians to get what they need during the pandemic. So for instance, they were going to give $1,000 for CERB. We got it to $2,000. They're going to give 10% wage subsidies. We got it to 75%. We were going to do many things to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabina. David?
First and foremost, we need to get this focused back on the positive. Rather than trying to drive a wedge and divide people, we got to look at what is in everybody's best interest. Rather than use a stick, I believe in positive reinforcement. We need to encourage people. And as a nurse, I've seen people dying from fluid and in the lungs and dying on a bedside. But if we can talk about why this is important and focus it on what's in a person's best interest, that'll help get over, I believe, a lot of the vaccine hesitancy. The other piece, the other half of the question, going forwards, what are we going to do? I believe our plan is the best. We want to turn around and help people get back to work rather than pay them to stay home, because the debt levels are climbing. The interest rates on that is going to be astronomical, and that's money that could have been spent on social services to improve our healthcare system, but instead it's going into the banks as interest. So we need to get our economy back on track to ensure that our social net stays strong and all the things we love about Canada are there today, tomorrow, and in the future.
Thank you, David. Elizabeth?
Sorry, thanks for the question. Look, I know, Sabina, you weren't in the House, but it wasn't the way you're describing it. It wasn't the NDP forcing these changes. I can't tell you how wonderful and collaborative the experience of the beginning of the pandemic Parliament was. From March of 2020 till mid-September of 2020, every single measure adopted in this country was done by unanimous consent by all parliamentarians working together, which means that the $80 billion in spending could have been stopped had one MP stood up and said no. We pushed together collaboratively to improve the CERB, to improve the wage subsidies. And where it's true, the NDP did have the balance of power, they could have insisted on pharmacare, they could have insisted on stopping the Trans Mountain Pipeline. But back to the pandemic, I think if afterwards we need to study this. I think it's another example of fractured federalism, that all of the public health officers for every province and territory were not at the same table with Dr. Theresa Tam. That's the approach Australia used. I think we needed to share more information and collaborate more.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And Sherri, over to you.
Can you repeat the question so that I can specifically address it? There's so much we could say here.
Sure. I am interested in understanding how each of the candidates sees themselves and their parties managing the pandemic going forward. What will you do to protect our rights? And how do you see Canada's deepening debt load being effectively managed?
So I think that the recent pandemic has shown the importance of science, the critical role that science plays in decision making, and our response was aligned with supporting sort of actioning public health expert recommendations. I think that must continue, that Canadians really need to know that the decisions of government will be informed by the specialists who should be informing them, and not by sort of alternative political views. I think that we need to continue to focus on a strong and robust procurement of vaccines and the protective measures, but also in protecting those who are vulnerable economically to with supports that are necessary, whether you're a business owner, whether you are whether you've lost your job due to the pandemic or lost your income, or you are housing insecure as well. But certainly I think continuing to invest in Canadians, we said we would be here for Canadians as long as it would take. And I think that that's really the path forward. And the spending for sure is overwhelmingly high, but the pandemic response has required it.
Great. Thank you. And the next question we have is from Keith. Military procurement has been an inept political gong show for decades in Canada. What would your party do to make the whole process work better, and to put restrictions on the practice of a new party in power reversing decisions by a previous government, thereby costing the taxpayers countless millions in wasted tax dollars? And we're going to start with David.
First thing we need to do is we need to take the politics out of military procurement. I think a great example would be to look at Australia. There, both parties form a combined defense, so the policy going forwards is going to be the same, regardless of if there's a change in government. I would hope, with more minority parliaments especially, we'd be able to take the politics out of it and recognize this is important for the common good of Canada, so that going forwards, we can make sure our men and women in uniform have the equipment they need to be there for us when we need them.
Thank you, David. Elizabeth?
I think we need to have an examination of what military procurement is for, and in the 21st century, what our security needs really are. I think we need to realign our security around the largest security threat, which is not a foreign power, but is the climate emergency. We would not want to be buying new fighter jets before we've adequately made sure we have water bombers where we need them to put out fires, to protect people where they live. As to military procurement, where we certainly do need search and rescue. We definitely need our coasts with proper Coast Guard surveillance and other vessels. And icebreakers, which were promised ages ago by Stephen Harper, and we still don't see them. These processes also must be well managed and at arm's length from all politicians. We had some reasonably well-run procurement processes, but then I have to say there's a lot of excess profit baked into the military-industrial complex, whether it's in Canada or elsewhere in the world. I think we need to actually hold people to account.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And now we will have Sabina.
I absolutely agree with Elizabeth that we will need to figure out why we have a military, what we need it for, when we need to use it, and for what purposes. And the major emergency is the climate emergency, and all of our tools need to be used for that. Having said that, we need to have proper services for veterans who are in the military. That's more important than any procurement. And we also need to look at the massive sexual assault accusations that are going through the military. So in terms of military reform, period, a lot needs to go on there. And I think that it's a good time in our global history to look at what we need weapons for.
Great. Thank you, Sabina. We're going to have a few questions now that are for individuals. And we're going to start actually with you, Sabina. So this is a question from Ruth, and she would like to know, just for you, many islanders have long supported the NDP and have been disappointed by Premier Horgan, particularly regarding LNG, offshore salmon fishery licenses, and the logging of the tiny fraction of remaining old growth trees in BC. Where do you stand on these issues?
I, like all of us, I believe that I really do have a great understanding and respect and love for old growth forests. So we believe that we need to have a national plan, putting Indigenous people first and foremost on the old growth logging plan, and to create a good system. I know that many issues that the BC government is dealing with needs support from the federal government, but many of the contracts are old. And so these are things that the BC government is now dealing with after many years. Again, this is what we can do as a federal government is make sure we're giving supports to Indigenous communities to lead old growth forestry strategies and new relationships to all resource extraction in the province and the country. This is an issue that's going to face the world. It's not just us.
Thank you, Sabina. And now we have a question that is just for David. We have several different people that would like answers on the following. If the Conservatives get in, will you make vaccinations mandatory, vaccine passports mandatory, and vaccine passports for domestic and international travel mandatory?
All in 1 minute. The short answer with vaccines mandatory, no. We will strongly encourage everybody to get vaccinated. And as I said before, I will get down and beg them to get vaccinated because I've seen the consequences. But ultimately, it's talk to your doctor and follow your doctor's advice, please. With regards to a passport for international travel, other countries have the right to demand who may or may not enter and under what conditions. As a federal government, we have an obligation to assist all of our citizens obtain the necessary paperwork for that. So we will help make sure that any Canadian who wants to travel to France or Japan or anywhere else will have the appropriate documentation they need to get into that country. Domestically, we will be turning around and working with the provinces who are that may or may not be imposing a travel passport to make sure that if they are going to put one in, it's going to be a unified, respected one across the country, and you don't need 9 different ones to go from BC to Halifax. But that's an issue of provincial jurisdiction. So, and okay, my time's up.
Okay, and now we have a question for Elizabeth May. Given the recent challenges within the federal Green Party and the current party leader, there'll be enormous scrutiny by the media on the things you say and the stands you take to represent your riding over the next term. How do you see yourself balancing potential conflicts that could arise between your standing up for the values and priorities expressed by Saanich Gulf Islanders and those priorities that are expressed by the party leader?
Well, it's an easy one. When I was first elected member of parliament for Saanich Gulf Islands, and I was the party leader, the Federal Council of the Green Party asked me, how are you going to balance your time between being party leader and serving your constituents? And I said, I hope I don't disappoint you, but my priority is going to be 90% being there to be the best MP for Saanich Gulf Islands I can possibly be. Fortunately, the Green Party has a deep commitment to grassroots democracy. No one is my boss except for all of you. I work for you, and whatever may be going on, and by the way, a ton of what I've read in the media, to the extent I know what's going on, it's rumors and gossip and trivia. When we're in a climate emergency, I can't believe that news media only want to ask me about gossip instead of real issues. But they're having a bit of sport at the moment. It will, I think, disappear after the election. We are fully committed, and I am committed as your MP to the grassroots democracy. That means that I don't have to balance whatever's going on anywhere. It makes no difference day to day to my life as your MP to do the work.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We now have a question for Sherri. It seems that many people are frightened by the uncertainties of a low carbon future. Does your platform include an appendix with a dramatized account of what life would be like in a low carbon Canada in, say, 2031? Do you know of any Canadian authors who describe such a potential future? It's pretty easy to envision life at $175 per ton of carbon for a retired ex-yuppie on Salt Spring. But what about the farmer who's 200 kilometers outside of Saskatoon and has $2 million invested in diesel-fueled farm equipment?
Thank you for this question. And I actually think it's something that speaks to one of the strengths of our climate change plan, which is also the inclusion of an equity lens, that climate change does not impact us all equally, depending on where we live, our access to various forms of privilege, and the cost of transitioning to a greener future also doesn't impact us all equally. So I think it's a rather dystopian question in its nature, but I do think it speaks to one of the strengths of our plan. And I will say that, you know, our plan, as it was evaluated by SFU recently, certainly considers the impact on the economy and the cost of living and affordability generally, and we rated 8 out of 10. So I think in terms of impact and achievability and affordability, our plan stands up.
Great, thank you. We're actually now going to go to some questions from the audience. So we are going to start with a question from Marie and Karen. And this is for everyone. How would you meet Indigenous demands for land back? And we're going to begin this with, Sherri.
Well, I mean, certainly continuing to pursue the path to reconciliation is a huge part of that. And, you know, as we implement UNDRIP and continue to work with First Nations on resolving, you know, sort of unceded lands and treaties, this is a big question. And I think that what is of concern to me is, are we going to elect a government that is dedicated to reconciliation and working with First Nations on matters of importance, or are we going to elect a government for which this is absolutely not a priority, and for which sort of the notion of scarcity or othering is sort of central to their politics, and certainly the politics of many of their supporters who are quite vocal. As an Indigenous person, certainly I feel quite othered by much of what I see on social media coming out of certain political movements and camps.
Thank you. Sabina, could you reply?
Yes, I can respond. I think we're absolutely committed to Indigenous rights. So far in this country, only 10 out of the 94 calls to action have been actually implemented. There's still boil water advisories across the country. So we want to end all that. Implementing UNDRIP right away is important. And of course, it's a long process to figure out how this is going to work with Indigenous nations all across the country and including around the Salish Sea. But again, this is a global issue. Indigenous nations are in the entire world, and they have all had their land taken from them by the state. So we're going to work really hard to make sure we can find a way to work together and going forward.
David?
We have to start by honoring the current treaties. And for those that don't have a treaty, we need to finish the treaty process. The Conservative Party has a record of modern treaty making, including the Malnuth and the Tawasin. We need to move forwards with the other treaties as well. Ms. Singh had mentioned we were the ones that brought forth the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I think today more than ever, the fact that there's only 10 out of 94, as Ms. Singh said, of the recommendations have been fulfilled, we need to get on that, especially numbers 72 to 79, which I believe were the ones that dealt with the residential schools. And we need to go forwards, have the treaty signed. But again, if we're not going to fully honor the other treaties, it really doesn't matter. And with a stroke of a pen, Trudeau could enact Jordan's principle. He could stop fighting the Human Rights Tribunal with regards to compensation for kids on the reserves who were not properly treated and properly have proper funded social services. And he could make sure that the schools on the reserves are funded to the equal amount as their provincial counterparts, because if we're not there for the children, we're setting them up for failure in the future.
Thank you, David.
I agree with you, David, but I just want to say, if you're going to use a pronoun, it's Dr. Singh.
My apologies on that. I also have a JD, but my wife's a medical doctor, and she always very clear to make sure. So, but I apologize, Dr. Singh.
Okay, and Elizabeth, over to you.
As Murray Sinclair, judge who, of course, was the lead commissioner on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, has pointed out, the situation in which we find ourselves of cultural and genocide in this country is the work of 150 years. And we are not going to reverse it in short order to meet some political check marks of one generation of politicians. It is primarily the work for settler culture people. We have to take it on, we have to be serious, and it does have to include land back. The Green Party has renounced the doctrine of discovery. We believe we have to renounce the colonial vestiges that, of course, surround us as we sit in Parliament. I'm very angry, as our MLA Adam Olson has pointed out, that the deal with the Pachidat signed by Murray Rankin, the new version of UNDRIP in BC, is a new version of colonialism and paternalism to insist that Pachidat report to the government what they've spent, and then to say, oh, and with your logging that you're doing, we will insist that you shut down the protest. I am deeply troubled by the fact that Fairy Creek protesters are being brutalized by the police. But back to land back, we start with the Delgamuukw and Haida and Chilcotin decision, and we implement them.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This next question is just a very quick question that you can all answer with a yes or no. I see some of you have already answered it in the chat, but Tegan has asked, are all of you fully vaccinated? So I will start with Sabina.
Sorry, yes, fully vaccinated.
Okay. That's good. And David?
Clear yes or no questions are always nice. Yes.
They're quicker. And Elizabeth?
Yes.
And Sherri?
Yes.
Okay, that was an easy one.
But I have to say, I'm wondering, David, if you can explain how your leader, Aaron O'Toole, thinks he can say that he doesn't really know whether people should be fully vaccinated, but he will insist that his Minister of Health even be fully vaccinated. I think it's not your fault. I suppose you can't account for your leader, but this doesn't make any sense to say that we're not really sure that a cabinet should be fully vaccinated, except the Minister of Health, who must be.
I'll let Aaron answer that question, but I'd also point out at the same time, while Trudeau's making big statements about mandatory vaccinations, he's finally admitted that a number of his candidates are not fully vaccinated.
Okay, we're going to go on to the next question, which is from Rob. He would like to know where each of the candidates stand on repealing the most recent Liberal rifle ban. Since it's been in the news this week, I'd like to hear from all of the candidates. And we're going to start with David.
My focus, and I believe the proper focus, is we need to get the firearms off the streets and out of the hands of the criminals. Since over the last 6 years, firearm crimes have gone up over 20%. Trudeau's policies aren't working, things are getting worse. Our focus is to try to depoliticize this, go back to the facts. Let's work with the police officers. Let's work with victims. Let's work with the manufacturers, and let's work with sports shooters to come up with legislation that's going to work, that's not based on the color of the firearm, but on the rate of fire, the caliber, the barrel length. Let's focus on that. Automatic weapons in Canada have been banned since 1977. High capacity magazines have been banned alike in the same amount of time. We need to enforce our current laws first and make sure the firearms, as I said, get off the streets, while at the same time making sure that our Olympic skeet shooters don't have their weapons seized and are unable to turn around and compete in their sports.
Thank you, David. Elizabeth?
There's a lot of misunderstanding about what the government actually did. The Liberals have not yet brought in legislation, or they haven't passed legislation that changes the gun laws. By regulation, during the period of time I mentioned at the beginning of the pandemic, all bills in Parliament were only passed by unanimous consent. That's how we passed, as I mentioned, $80 billion worth of emergency help to Canadians. But in that period of time, Bill Blair brought forward regulations around what he called assault-style weapons. The bill to bring this in is Bill C-21, which died on the order paper when Trudeau went to the Governor General to cause this election, which is a completely unnecessary election. But that said, I was working on amendments to C-21. C-21 was recommending that there be a voluntary buyback program for firearms. Certainly the women's organizations that rallied around a code-followed technique and continue to be the conscience of the nation on gun control are calling for mandatory buyback. I hope when the bill is reintroduced, if it is reintroduced after the election, I'll be in a position to continue to work to improve it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Sabina.
So Jack Clayton in 2008 was the first New Democrat to call for powers for municipalities to ban handguns and to remove assault weapons from the cities. We want to keep assault weapons and illegal handguns off our streets permanently, do more to stop the smuggling of guns across the border from the US, and prevent violence at its roots by ensuring all young people in Canada have options for success and hope for the future.
Thank you. Now, I know we've had a number of questions already on climate change, but so did we miss you, Sherri?
You did, yes.
Oh, I am so sorry.
That's okay, no problem. I just wanted to make a brief statement on this. I started my early career working in violence against women in the shelter system. And this is, I was an age when École Polytechnique was my cohort of students deeply shaped by this. Assault style weapons, I think, should absolutely be regulated and are not sort of bringing this down to Olympic athletes. I think sort of trivializes the significance of the harm that they cause, the danger that they represent, and the risk that they pose. Particularly, it's a very gendered question for women who live are more likely to die at the hands of violent partners, for example. So, I think that making them more accessible is highly problematic and dangerous to women across the country.
Thank you, Sherri. Sorry we missed you. We have one more question that was missed from before, which was from Karen, who says that also there were similar questions from a number of people. Just wants to hear from the candidates on the actual concrete steps with a timeline that their party would take on climate change. And we're going to start this one with Elizabeth.
Thank you. We have to begin a couple of decades ago, but we don't have that chance now. I've worked on this issue, believe it or not, since 1987. My daughter was a babe in arms when I stood there at the Rio Earth Summit and watched every world leader sign the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to reduce emissions so that we would not be in the situation we are in now, because too many politicians have kicked this down the road. Saying we're going to get net zero by 2050, which is the Liberals' new gambit, is, as Greta Thunberg said, it is surrender. So our timeline is to immediately cancel the Trans Mountain Pipeline, divert that Crown Corporation to do some good things. We've created a Crown Corporation. It's full of people working, but they're doing the wrong thing. They're building a pipeline instead of putting out fires and building fire breaks and protecting our communities. We'd cancel fossil fuel subsidies immediately, all of them. Ban fracking immediately, and not just rely on price signals. Use our regulations. We, under Part 4 of SEPA, we have the ability right now to say to every installation, you're cutting your emissions on this schedule as of now, and that will allow renewables to take over.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Sherri.
Thank you. Again, I would point to third-party assessments of our climate change plan in terms of the achievability, impact, and affordability. And there is, I think, no arguing among the candidates here that climate change represents a critical, it's a critical issue that we have no choice but to address as quickly as we can. I think that while it is urgent, there is also a call for us to be responsible about the transition, to bring Canadians with us. And that, in my mind, is it's an issue of equity. So while it's politically convenient and it's a tight line to say, ban this and cancel that, the reality is that those who have not would suffer most in an economic black swan event. So I think it's fundamentally inappropriate and naive to even sell that sort of severe and unachievable plan to Canadians when it's assessed and is by climate change experts, of which I am not, but I trust the experts who are apolitical when they review the plans. And there are utopian goals that are arguably desirable, but achieving them would be extremely harmful to a lot of people.
So at extinction, Sherri, there'll be no economy on a dead planet. We are not talking here about incremental things this is not going to be easy. I'm sorry for interrupting, but it is so essential.
Not about it being
We act
easy.
like we understand we're in a climate emergency. It doesn't take a lot of time to cancel a pipeline that's costing Canadians $17 billion. It just doesn't cost.
It's about being responsible, not about being easy. And it's also an issue of equity. And I think that, again, our plan has been reviewed and is arguably impactful, achievable, and affordable. And all of those things are very, very important.
Okay, thank you. Sabina.
Thank you. Your plan, the Liberal plan, has been reviewed through an economic lens, and the environmental crisis that we're facing is not an economic issue. What Elizabeth has said is exactly what we will do. We will ban fracking, cancel the pipeline, and make a fair tax system in this country so that people are paying their fair share. Last year, there were record profits made over the pandemic, and those people partly have to pay for making an equitable transition, a better, greener world right now, and they are responsible for it. So taxing 1% on the 1% has also been approved by the Parliamentary Budget Office and has been shown that we can do it. We can help Canadians and we can put money in their pockets to help them fight the climate emergency. I would love to work with Laurel Collins, who has been trying to deal with the Climate Emergency Act, Accountability Act put forth by the Liberals, which had no targets for 10 years. So they've been working very hard to get targets up so that we have emission reduction targets for the next 10 years.
Thank you. And David, please.
A minute is simply too short of a time frame to give a full answer with the details. So I'll give the goals, and for the details, please send me an email at info@davidbusch.ca or go to our website. Our goals, they're laid out in our plans. We will make our 2030 Paris targets. We will be net zero by 2050. Our environmental plan was independently audited and found to be as good or better than the Liberal plan. And our plan is going to be better for the economy. Now, I can't speak to the Green Party's environmental plan, but I will refer to a recent quote from Andrew Reaver that the federal Greens do not have a climate plan, comma, to be perfectly blunt. Our plan will meet the goals, it'll meet our targets without overly damaging the economy. In fact, will be beneficial to the local economy.
Thank you, David. And this is going to be the last question now. And in full disclosure, this question is my question. So I thought I would get to ask one tonight. So I want to ask you all a question about broken promises. We've seen a lot of election promises broken over the years, both federally and provincially. And our trust in leaders has been terribly eroded because of it. Can you address this? How do you think we should best hold our elected leaders to their promises? And personally, what would you do if your party is elected and a promise that your party made is broken? Will you keep quiet or will you object? Would you cross the floor or bring down the government if you held the balance of power? And we're going to begin with Sherri.
Thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, I certainly encounter a fair amount of political cynicism when talking to voters who are looking backward over time and are looking, they want to see integrity and they want to see accountability, and they deserve to see those things. I think that, you know, crossing the floor is certainly not something that I would entertain or, you know, would see that as a real failure, I think, in terms of my choice. I've been involved with the Liberal Party for several decades and feel a high values alignment. So that, I think, is not something that I would anticipate. But I do think that voting on the interests of your riding is something absolutely that I would be prepared to do and would do, and certainly look at Terry Beach as a member of parliament in our party who did just that, and would expect that that would be something that could happen and allow me to stay in my party and not certainly require me to leave. I think that the platform promises that we see, while they're absolutely goals and objectives, I again don't see myself as somebody who would abandon the support that I receive from those who are partisans and voters in the riding by leaving the party.
Thank you, Sherri. Sabina?
We've seen so many broken promises through elections that the cynicism in government has gotten far too high. As I said, my children are 21 and 19, and I hear from their young people all the time about how cynical and how they need to take over the government so that they can hold their leaders accountable. One thing that I'm very proud to say, well, first of all, we've seen Justin Trudeau break so many promises. We don't really know Erin O'Toole very well, but Jagmeet Singh is a really good leader. It is not only in our face, to be honest, but it is really, he's trustworthy, and he's proven it over and over again. And he shows me all the time how to bring love and compassion to everything that I do. So I'm convinced that yes, he would listen to me if I had something to say that I felt like he wasn't holding a promise correctly, and B, he would do the integral thing.
Thank you, Sabina. And David, please.
We have an accountability policy specifically for this. And I would encourage people, again, go to our website, take a look at our party on this and other issues. With regards to specifically, we've seen so many promises being broken, especially over the last 6 years, from planting 2 billion trees to having the most open and transparent government ever. It's no wonder that people are frustrated and disillusioned. With regards to the specific part of the question about crossing the floor, I fully believe if you can't sit with the party you came with, you should be sitting as an independent. Jody Wilson-Raybould demonstrated that very, very well. It's not fair to your electorate who voted you in on a set of policies and promises with a party to simply jump ship and go to the other side. If you can't stay with your party, it is my opinion that you should be sitting as an independent, or if absolutely necessary, step down for a by-election. If I could not stay with my party, I would be looking at independent, but I fully support Erin O'Toole. I believe in our party and I believe in our policies.
Thank you. And Elizabeth.
Thank you. And I do know that all of you believe that those are things you could do. The experience of being in Parliament has been to see so many good people be heartbroken as they had to vote against things they didn't vote for, things they don't believe in, against things they wanted because their party leader told them to, including, yes, Sabina, including Jagmeet Singh. This is the nature, and I know, David, you mean it. I've seen some brave souls go and sit as independents, but there's not many of them. I am very committed to keeping every promise I make. And those promises are ones that I remember making to all of you and constituents of Saanich Gulf Islands, that I would never heckle. I've never heckled. That I would fight to make Parliament a better place, that I would respect my colleagues, work across party lines, and do the work to solve problems for constituents, to improve our quality of life. And of course, and I'm sorry for the passion that meant that I just couldn't stay silent at the idea that it was expensive to save ourselves. I'm desperate about the climate emergency, and I will never break my word to you to do everything I can to address it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So we're now at the end, and we'd like to just hear one more time from each of the candidates. You have a minute for closing statements. We're going to do this in reverse alphabetical order this time, starting with Sabina Singh. Oh, you are muted, Sabina.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Okay. In 2006, MP Jack Clayton, leader of the NDP, was the first MP to introduce a climate change bill. He set the stage for the NDP MPs to fight for climate justice built upon our principles of social equity and justice for all. I want to join our amazing island MPs to fight for you in Ottawa. MP Gord Johns working on plastic in the ocean. MP Alistair McGregor fighting to keep freighters from anchoring off the Gulf Islands. MP Randall Garrison, who is fighting to protect orca habitat. And MP Laurel Collins, who is making sure that the climate accountability targets in the next 10 years are created and met. I want to join them and to fight for you and for climate justice. I want to join them to fight for climate justice in Ottawa. Thank you for organizing. Thank you all for coming, and the other candidates. Please vote for me and the NDP in the next general election.
And now we will hear from Sherri Moore-Arbour.
Thank you very much, Tara. And I will echo Sabina's thanks to hosts and organizers and for all those who have taken the time to attend tonight. It's always very exciting to talk about the issues that matter to us, and it's very heartening to hear that so many people are paying attention to the granular details of everybody's platforms, and that's wonderful. I think that the recent events in the last few years have really demonstrated how directly impacted we all are by the federal government. And with the pandemic in the resolution phase, but not yet resolved, I think it is critical that that this particular riding, Saanich Gulf Islands, has a strong voice inside of government that is inside a compassionate and pragmatic government that's prepared to manage responsibly the resolution and also be the champion in a practical and achievable way of climate change that is so important to those in this riding and so clearly required.
Thank you. Elizabeth May.
Thank you. For my closing remarks, I really want to focus on something positive, what we can do together. I didn't want this election out, not just because I just had a knee replacement. I really didn't want this election because Parliament was working well. We were actually working together, compromising. I have to say the Climate Accountability Act is not a good example of that. It's a very weak act. It was hard to hold my nose and vote for it. But the reality of it is we are lucky that nothing right now looks like we're going to head to a majority government of any of the big parties. A minority parliament is when you want more Greens. We want Nick Loughton in Victoria and Harley Gordon in Esquimalt Saanich Sooke. We want, of course, Paul Malley and I'm a Lady Smith and across the country. We need Greens in parliament because they won't waffle. We won't forget what the point of getting elected was. And in a minority parliament, that's when we can make our biggest difference and hopefully reverse some of the direction we are in now and put ourselves on a path to having a livable world.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And last but not least, David.
Thank you. This, and I agree with Elizabeth May, unnecessary and unfortunate election is about your choice. If you're happy with the direction that Trudeau is leading this country, you have three choices. If you're happy with the status quo, you can vote for Justin Trudeau. You can vote for Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. You can vote for Anna May Paul and the Green Party. But if you're like me and you're deeply concerned with the direction that the country is headed, there's one choice, and that's Erin O'Toole and the Conservative Party of Canada, and me, David Busch. We have a plan. It is laid out. Read it. If you agree with our plan, and I am sure if you take the time to consider it, you will see that our plan will move us ahead. It'll send us back in the right direction. And if you agree with it, vote for me, David Busch, vote for Erin O'Toole, and vote for the Conservative Party of Canada. Thank you for listening, and please, regardless of your decision tonight, make sure you do get out and vote.
Thank you, David. And thank you very much to all of our candidates. We wish you all the best of luck. Also, thank you to Richard Steele and Kathy Page, without whom this would not have been possible. Most importantly, thank you to the public for watching, and we hope that you have a clear idea of whom to vote for. If you missed part of the debate or want to see it again, the link will be on the saltspringforum.com homepage after tomorrow. Thanks to our sponsors, Country Grocer and the Salt Spring Exchange, who are our media sponsors for this event. Good night and good luck to all. Thank you.
Good night and thank you.